Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take a stack of information, could be articles, research, maybe just your notes, and really cut through the noise.
Yep. Find those insights that actually matter, help you get informed fast.
Exactly. Think of us as your guides through the technical jungle sometimes, spotting the key developments, figuring out what they really mean for how you build and manage stuff.
hmm
And for this deep dive, we're looking squarely at Azure. We've got a summary here. Looks like updates from June 9th to June 12th, generated just a couple of days ago on the 15th.
Right. And the mission, as always, is to unpack these announcements, find the real significance for you, the technical user.
Because the pace is just relentless, isn't it?
It really is. So, yeah, our goal isn't just listing every single little tweak.
Yeah.
It's finding those announcements that bring genuinely new capabilities or, significantly change how you might approach security or architecture performance.
Or operations. Okay, got it. Let's dive into this stack then. Where do you think we should start?
Let's begin with something foundational, security and storage. There's a pretty significant one that just landed in public preview. Cross-tenant customer managed keys, CMK, for premium SSD V2 and Ultra disks.
Okay, cross-tenant CMK. Help me unpack that a bit. What's the significance? What problem is this solving that maybe wasn't easy before?
Well, this is quite interesting, actually. It tackles a fundamental challenge you see in certain enterprise setups or like multi-org scenarios. It lets you encrypt your high-performance disks, the premium SSD V2, and Ultra disks using a key you control, a customer-managed key.
Right, CMK, standard practice for sensitive data.
Exactly. But the kicker is that key can now live in an Azure Key Vault in a completely different Microsoft tenant from where the disk itself is.
Hold on. So my disk is running in Tenant A, doing its thing, but the actual encryption key locking it down is managed securely over in Tenant B.
Precisely. That's a serious separation of concerns, as you said. Before, your CMK pretty much had to be in the same tenant, or you had some complex linking maybe.
Yeah.
This cross-tenant thing offers a much cleaner, stricter security boundary.
Okay, I can see that. Like maybe a big holding company where subsidiaries have their own Azure environments, but the central security team wants to manage all the encryption keys in one dedicated secure tenant.
That's a perfect example. Or think about maybe a sensitive collaboration with a partner. You need them to provide the key for data you're processing in your tenant, but they absolutely need to retain full control over that key's lifecycle in their tenant.
Gotcha. So it's really enabling these very strict security models, especially for complex org structures or collaborations, goes way beyond just separating subscriptions, right?
Yeah.
The key master is truly separate from the resource owner.
Exactly. It gives you that enhanced control, that compliance flexibility you need in those specific, sometimes heavily regulated situations. It's public preview right now, so you can try it out. Tagged under storage, Azure Disk Storage features, and security. Definitely one to watch if your architecture needs that level of key isolation.
Okay, sticking with security for a moment, but maybe shifting to resilience. We also saw a generally available announcement, right? Azure Site Recovery support for Azure Trusted Launch VMs running Linux OS.
Right, yeah. So Azure Site Recovery, ASR, that's your go-to for disaster recovery, migrations.
The workhorse.
Pretty much.
Right.
And Trusted Launch, that's all about securing the boot process for your Gen 2 VMs. Uses things like Secure Boot, Virtual TPM, basically protecting against nasty low-level stuff like bootkits and rootkits.
And ASR already supported Trusted Launch for Windows VMs. So this update basically brings that same critical DR capability to Linux VMs that are using Trusted Launch.
That's the core of it, yeah. If you've gone down the path of using Trusted Launch for your important Linux workloads on Azure, maybe databases, critical app servers, anything needing that extra boot integrity check, you can now fully protect them with ASR.
Okay, so you get both the foundational security and the robust DR. No compromises needed for those secure Linux environments. That feels like it closes a pretty significant gap for enterprise Linux shops.
Absolutely. And it's GA now, ready for production. You'll see it tagged under Launched, Management and Governance, Migration, Azure Site Recovery, Compliance, Features, Management, and Security. A solid step forward.
Great. Okay, let's maybe pivot from security and storage.
Yes.
Let's talk compute, the actual engines. Some new GA options in the VM space, I see.
Indeed. 3 new series just hit general availability. They're all storage optimized. The Lsv4, and Lsv4 series.
Right, new VM sizes pop up all the time, but storage optimized usually points to a specific use case, doesn't it? What's the focus with these?
Correct. These aren't your everyday general-purpose VMs. Like the Ls prefix suggests, they're built for workloads that need really, really high throughput and IOPS, specifically to local SSD storage that's directly attached to the VM itself.
Okay, so we're thinking things like big data engines maybe
Yeah.
processing huge data sets locally, or NoSQL databases like Cassandra, MongoDB, stuff that loves fast local I/O.
Exactly. Or even relational databases, where you might configure them to use that fast local storage for temp files, or maybe even primary data in certain specific setups.
Then the hardware.
So the Lsv4 and Lsv4 are using the latest 4th gen AMD EPYC processors, that's the Genoa generation,
Hmm.
and the Lsv4 series. That one uses the 5th gen Intel Xeon processors, codenamed Emerald Rapids.
So you get choices, the latest CPU architectures combined with that high-performance local NVMe storage.
Yep. Having these options GA means you can confidently plan production rollouts using these newer generations for those I/O-hungry apps.
Makes sense. If your workload's bottlenecked on storage performance or just needs massive local disk I/O, these are definitely worth checking out. Tagged under Launched, Compute, Virtual Machines, Features, and Services.
Definitely.
All right, so from VMs, let's talk about connecting everything. Networking, a couple of updates here caught my eye. One's regional, one's more feature-focused.
Right. First up, and this is pretty significant if you operate there, Azure Virtual Network Manager is now generally available in Azure China.
VNet Manager. That's the service for managing virtual networks centrally across potentially many subscriptions, right? Helps tame that network sprawl.
Exactly that. In big organizations, keeping track of connectivity, security policies across, dozens, maybe hundreds of subscriptions, it gets incredibly complex and error-prone if you do it piecemeal. VNet Manager gives you that single view. Define network groups, connectivity setups like mesh or hub and spoke.
And the security rules too, right? The security admin rules.
Crucially, yes. You can enforce network policies at scale, and they can even override local network security groups, NSGs, ensuring baseline security across the board.
So bringing that whole centralized control and governance capability to the Azure China region, that's a pretty big deal for companies with deployments there. Simplifies architecture, helps enforce security posture, streamlines ops.
It really does. It just unlocks that enterprise-scale network management that was, frankly, harder to achieve consistently in that specific region before. Tagged Launched, Networking, Azure Virtual Network Manager, features management security, regions and data centers, and pricing and offerings.
Okay. Also in networking, but shifting to protecting the apps themselves. There's a private preview for profile and root WAF policies on Azure Front Door. What's this about?
Yeah, this tackles a point of flexibility when you're using Azure Front Door, the global load balancer and CDN service. Web application firewalls, WAFs, are obviously critical for stopping common web attacks.
And how did WAF policies work with Front Door before this preview?
Typically, you had to link your WAF policy directly to a specific front-end host configured in your Front Door profile, which works, but it could get a bit awkward if you had lots of front-end hosts or if you wanted different rules depending on the specific URL path someone was hitting.
Right. So if I had, say, myapp.com of Mabhin and myapp.com of Madmin applying different levels of WAF strictness based on API versus admin, that wasn't straightforward.
Exactly. It was kind of all or nothing at the front-end host level. This private preview introduces linking WAF policies at 2 new levels. First, at the Front Door profile level, which is like a global default for everything in that profile.
Okay.
But more powerfully, you can now link WAF policies at the root level. So you associate specific WAF policies with your individual routing rules within Front Door.
Okay. That sounds much more granular. So I could have a really strict WAF policy guarding my admin route, maybe a different one tuned for my public app route, and perhaps something less strict for serving static content, all managed within the same Front Door setup.
Precisely. It gives you that flexibility you need for more complex applications where different parts just have different security needs. It's still private preview, mind you, so it's tagged in development, networking, security, Azure Front Door, web application firewall, and features. But definitely something to keep an eye on if you're managing web apps behind Front Door.
Okay, definitely useful. Let's shift gears again. Let's look at updates around data analytics, maybe some developer tooling, seeing some interesting previews that bridge different services.
Yeah, a pretty notable one in public preview is the Azure Databricks Power Platform connector.
Okay, Databricks and Power Platform. That immediately sounds like connecting two, well, quite different parts of the Microsoft cloud. Databricks for the heavy-duty data science, big data processing, Power Apps for the low-code business apps. What does this connector actually do?
It's really about making the data that's been processed and curated inside your Azure Databricks Lakehouse much more easily accessible and, importantly, actionable from within the Power Platform. The highlight seems to be enabling real-time data access.
Real time. So you don't necessarily need to set up like complex ETL jobs to copy data out of Databricks into, say, Dataverse or SQL just so Power Apps can see it.
That seems to be the goal. Imagine a business analyst or maybe a citizen developer building a Power App. They could potentially build a dashboard or maybe a simple data entry form that reads data directly from a table sitting in Databricks. Or maybe even trigger a Databricks job, all without having to leave the Power Platform environment.
Huh. That's interesting. So it empowers the people building the front-end business apps with low-code tools to directly tap into the insights crunched by the data engineers and scientists in Databricks.
That's the vision, yeah. Creating more dynamic, data-driven apps without needing deep knowledge of Spark or how Databricks works internally. It's kind of democratizing access to that process data.
Yeah, I can see that bridging a gap opens up possibilities for getting big data insights into the hands of business users much faster, using tools they already know. It's in public preview, tagged underbound. In preview, AI plus machine learning, analytics, Azure Databricks, and features.
And sticking with analytics, but moving over to Azure Data Explorer, ADX, there's a private preview for persistent graph semantics.
Okay, ADX, or Custo as many know it, super fast for time series data, logs, telemetry, that kind of stuff. What does persistent graph semantics mean in that context? Graphs.
Right. ADX has had some graph capabilities before, but typically if you ran a query exploring relationships, connecting dots between entities in your data, the graph structure itself was transient. It only existed in memory while that specific query was executing.
Ah, okay, so once the query finished, the graph model just vanished.
Pretty much. So persistent here means exactly what it sounds like. This preview lets you define and actually maintain durable graph data structures within Azure Data Explorer. You build a graph model based on your ingested data, and that structure sticks around. It persists beyond just one query.
I see. So that enables more like enterprise scale relationship analysis directly within ADX.
That's the idea. Think about connecting user activity logs to sessions and devices over time, or tracing network flows through infrastructure logs, analyzing supply chain relationships buried in operational data. Any scenario where the connections between the data points are just as important as the points themselves, and you want that relationship model to be durable and queryable continuously.
Right. So it kind of elevates ADX beyond just time series lookups into handling more complex relationship queries on potentially massive data sets right there in the platform.
Cool. Private preview for now, tagged in preview, analytics, Azure Data Explorer, and features.
Exactly.
And one more for developers, looks like a private preview of the Azure Command Launcher for Java, which they're calling Jazz.
Yeah, Jazz. It's a very specific tool aimed squarely at Java developers deploying onto Azure. It's essentially a new launcher for the the Java virtual machine, but designed and optimized specifically for running in the Azure environment.
Why would Java need a special launcher just for Azure? What's the benefit they're aiming for? Java's supposed to be portable, right? It is, but the goal here seems to be about, better default ergonomics, making Java apps run more efficiently out of the box when they're in containers or VMs on Azure, optimizing startup time, resource consumption in cloud environments, especially containers or serverless. That often takes quite a bit of specific tuning.
Okay, so Jazz is aiming to reduce some of that manual tuning hassle to get Java apps running efficiently on things like Azure Container Apps, AKS, ARO, or even just plain VMs without needing to be a deep JVM tuning expert for cloud scenarios.
That seems to be the promise, making sure Java apps use resources effectively by default when they land on Azure. Could lead to better performance, maybe lower costs, without developers needing to dive super deep into JVM flags specific to cloud. It's a targeted helper for that ecosystem. Still in development, private preview, tagged under in development, containers, compute, and various Azure compute services like ACA, AKS, ARO, VMs, and features.
Got it. And just to round things out, there was a quick regional expansion note, too.
Yes, just a straightforward one. The archive access tier is now generally available in Italy North.
Right, the archive tier in blob storage. That's the super low-cost option for data you basically never need to access quickly. Long-term backups, compliant archives, where retrieval times and hours are perfectly fine.
Correct. So this is just expanding the availability of that specific cold storage tier to the Italy North region.
Which is important for any organization needing to store that kind of infrequently accessed data in Italy, maybe for data residency rules or compliance, letting them do it at the absolute lowest storage cost point available there.
Exactly that. Tagged, launched, storage, archive storage services, and features.
So, wow. Okay, looking back at just these few days, June 9th to 12th, we've touched on foundational security with cross-tenant keys, better DR for secure Linux, new compute options for high I/O, easier network management in China, more flexible WAV controls on front door, bridging Databricks and Power Platform, persistent graphs in ADX, a specific tool for Java devs, and more cold storage regionally.
It's quite a range, isn't it? A real snapshot of how the platform keeps evolving across the board. You've got GA features you can use right now and previews hinting at what's coming next.
It really does underscore just how quickly things move in the cloud.
Yeah, and that brings up maybe a final thought for you, the listener. When you see this constant stream of updates, even just over a few days, adding flexibility here, performance there, new security options, new connections between services, how might the cumulative effect of all these continuous improvements actually reshape how you think about designing, deploying, or operating your applications on Azure over, say, the next year or two? What new opportunities or maybe even challenges does this relentless pace of change present for your strategy?